Culture and society throughout American history. Before the arrival of Europeans, the Americas already contained vibrant societies and distinct cultures. The natives who inhabited these continents had social structures and thriving villages that often held more populations than many European cities. A prominent part of Native American culture included their religion that contained aspects of spiritualism and animism. They believed in many higher powers that controlled various aspects of daily life, from crops to relationships, in addition to an overall Great Spirit. From their artwork, it is evident that they revered many animals. This is due to their dependence on animals as a source of food and tools. Additionally, Native American societies were quite different from those of Europeans. Everyone had a part, whether it was related to agriculture, domestic chores, or hunting. Europeans, by contrast, were slightly less egalitarian and much more materialistic. In addition, they were largely Christian. Because of this, upon the instance of European contact, the encomienda system developed in which Europeans would convert natives to Christianity in addition for using them for hard labor. This was a particularly negative clash of cultures, in which European culture was forced upon the pre-existing culture of the Native Americans. In period 2, Europeans continued to establish themselves in the New World. Soon enough, European colonies were prevalent along the American coast. In Salem, Massachusetts, popular culture included the belief that magic was at work in the society. This led to many accusations, an atmosphere of distrust and suspicion, as well as many resulting trials. Additionally, much like the subjugation of the Native Americans in period 1, the importing of African slaves to America resulted in a cultural shift. The slaves brought exotic rhythms, distinct music, and spiritual ties with them from Africa. This also modified American society as it became even more stratified. With the presence of natives and Africans, there are many instances of mixed-race children. This created a society in which the more white roots you had, the more you were respected. A great shift in society occurred with the American Revolution in the late 1700s. Prior to the Revolution, British control was harsh and oppressive. There was little local government or community, and constant underlying tensions between British immigrants and those born and bred in the colonies. Additionally, during the actual war itself, the divide between Loyalists and Patriots worsened as families splintered and friendships were decimated. After the creation of the Declaration of Independence and the drafting of the Articles of Confederation, society was looser, more democratic, and more inclusive. There was a slight speed bump in which Americans scrambled to integrate a functional society, but after the Constitution was established, social tensions largely subsided. During the early 1800s, the United States slowly became more and more connected with the development of new transportation routes like the Cumberland Road and the Erie Canal. These connections allowed for a greater exchange of not only raw and manufactured goods, but also for a greater flow of ideas. However, the South still mainly relied on rivers as the principal method of transportation. This isolated the South, and this isolation led to the development of different conservative ideas and beliefs. These differences in culture led to more and more tension between the North and the South. The very beginnings of social movements also began during this time period. Abolitionists like Frederick Douglass and women's rights activists like Susan B. Anthony began to spread their ideas throughout the country. Overall, the most important social and cultural development during period 4 was the development of a unique American culture that was a mix of different immigrants in the country. The mid-1800s was the breaking point of the extreme tensions over slavery, land, and taxes. During the war, families made extreme sacrifices to support the armies. This extreme dedication to their ideals was showcased by the violence in Bleeding, Kansas. Additionally, many families were split up because of internal tensions. After the Civil War, there were many advances in the South. The passage of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments was a huge step for African Americans. However, feminist activists were still outraged that there was only male suffrage. The Southern society, however, continued to resist Republican Reconstruction through the passage of Jim Crow laws and the rise of extremely racist and hateful groups like the Ku Klux Klan. Republican Reconstruction largely came to an end with the election of Rutherford B. Hayes. Period 6 signified the rise of big business. This led to a larger gap in wealth. The rich became extremely rich, the middle class almost disappeared, and the poor became extremely poor. The industries were controlled by big businessmen like Rockefeller and Carnegie. Eventually, these men's companies were broken up. Angry laborers united in unions and forced the passage of anti-big business legislation, the most famous of which being the Sherman Antitrust Act. The lower and middle class also began to mobilize politically, forming the Populist Party. The rise of big business sparked the transition to a more urbanized society with cities built around larger factories. During the late 19th century, immigration increased exponentially as people from around the world were drawn by jobs and opportunities. These people brought their own culture and traditions with them that would later merge with the American culture. Immigration was largely unlimited except for discrimination against Asians, especially the Chinese. Discrimination was not limited to Asian immigrants, however. The South continued to stay racially divided, with the court declaring separate but equal in Plessy versus Ferguson. American Indians also faced violence and unfair treatment with a horrible trail of tears. The end of World War I brought about a huge wave of nationalism in the United States. From this, they jumped straight into the Roaring Twenties. The Roaring Twenties was a period characterized by cars, flappers, big parties, and illegal alcohol. Starting off at the end of World War I and ending with the Great Depression, the 20s were a quintessential part of American history. Jazz arose as a popular form of music. Flappers came about along with new roles for women. Prohibition wasn't stopping anyone from drinking, and moonshine became a huge success. But all the buying on margin during this time period ultimately caused the end to the Roaring Twenties, and the Great Depression began. This was a time of increased inflation and terrible living conditions. The Second World War helped to revitalize the economy and pulled the United States out of the Great Depression. The country mobilized once again, and they brought about the end of the war. Ultimately, the United States morale was revitalized, and the economy led to a period of proxy wars and space races. The end of World War II started with tensions between the Soviet Union and the United States. The United States raced to the moon and won. They also had a fight to contain communism everywhere, and this started with the building of the Berlin Wall. Later, it developed into proxy wars around the globe, many of which the United States were directly involved in. The most controversial war was the Vietnam War. The United States was against the initial regime that wanted to gain independence from France. However, this regime turned to communism, and the United States sided with the Democratic Front. On the home front, there were many mixed views about going to war in Vietnam. Many proponents against the war were young people who were part of the New Left or the Students for a Democratic Society. The beginning of Period 9 means the end of the Cold War, which brought relief to many families and sadness to many others. The first cases of AIDS were also reported in this period, but were thought to only affect the gay population, so the government took no action. Tensions began to increase in Iraq and Iran with the Iran-Contra affair, the First and Second Iraq War, and the September 11th attacks. The United States launched their anti-terror campaign into the Middle East, and that has continued until the present day. This period is also remarkable because the United States elected their first African-American president. Throughout American history, the immigration and emigration of many people with distinct backgrounds and cultures influenced the overall perspective and society of the country. Thus, America's culture and society today is the direct product of great mixing of world influence throughout time.